All right, so with that, let's move to the main event, which is a conversation with Dan Tonderys, class of 2014. As Dean Russell noted, Dan got his undergraduate degree and a master's degree in biomedical engineering from Brown, and in the decade since has worked at all kinds of interesting product design companies. Names we've all heard of: SharkNinja, Whoop, and Apple. Hard to find a brand name that's more accessible than that one. So we'll talk to Dan about his journey for the first 30 minutes or so, including what he did, how he made his transitions, what he's learned along the way. And after that, we'll open up to questions that you all may have. So, Dan, great to have you with us.
Thanks
Delighted
for having
to.
me.
Yeah, of course, of course. I've
And
got so
thanks
much
everyone for
ground.
joining.
Yeah, of course. I've uh, I've got a lot of ground I'd love to cover. Your story is rich
Yep.
in so many different dimensions. Some of it sort of jumps right off the page in terms of the companies you work for, but there's a lot more in between that I'd love to cover. So let's start maybe in a place that will be relevant for everyone on the call. Tell us about your last couple of years at Brown. Set the stage in terms of your mindset. Do your best to remember what it was like to be on Main Green on a spring afternoon. And I know Zoom wasn't a thing, right? But tell us what your mindset was and how you're thinking about life after graduation, how you got your first job.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming it's like the first nice day in Providence for a while, so thanks everyone for being inside and listening. But yeah, the um kind of wrapping up my last 2 years at Brown, I did biomedical engineering and was deciding between going into industry and staying for my master's. There was a professor at Brown who taught both the SolidWorks class and the design and mechanical assemblies class that I really enjoyed working with and really liked. Decided to stay for my master's in BME, and then once through that, I focused almost less on BME and more on product design and design in general because that's what I had fallen in love with in my previous internship. That's the brilliance of Brown is even though the name on the piece of paper says BME and you fill all the requirements out, there is opportunity to pursue those upper level classes that um, kind of speak to your passions at school and what's going to go forward in life. Um, and instead of taking a job at a medical device company, I took a leap of faith and moved to SharkNinja to design vacuum cleaners and steam mops and everything that goes into your kitchen. And it was kind of a wonderful experience, just super fast paced. Consumer products are an awesome way to get your foot in the door and designing and launching a lot of things in a short amount of time. Um,
Let me
and
interrupt you for a second because
yeah,
you said internships. So again, just to kind of put yourself in the shoes of folks that are on the call, like what internships are you talking about? How'd you get those?
sh sure, yeah. My internships were also vast at Brown. I started at a company called New Label Technology right after my sophomore year, which was a company making labels in Providence, Rhode Island. Um, and that was like chem lab focused. And then I did a internship in a research lab, and I realized that the lab wasn't for me. And that was kind of and we had talked previously about an area of self-reflection and what I liked and what I didn't like about certain positions. And then luckily, I was able to get an internship at Zymedica, which was a medical device design company in Providence. That actually I got through dropping a resume at a Brown career fair. I
Right.
actually remember that pretty vividly back then. So those career fairs are important, and it was super helpful to network there. And that was design and lab focused. But in that internship at Zymedica, I was like, wow, I really like SolidWorks. I really like designing the devices, and that propelled
Nice.
into the next thing. So kind of taking it, it's almost like don't be afraid to take an internship like if you hate an internship, that's also a learning experience in
For sure.
itself
For
of
sure.
like, you know what you don't like.
Right, like you figured out that research might not be the thing for you,
Yeah.
and design might be the thing for you. And do you
Yeah.
think having those internships was a big part of enabling you to get the first full-time job?
It was that, and I also was very lucky that the first full-time job was at SharkNinja with the uh my first boss was actually my professor at Brown,
Right,
which was very
helps.
exciting. But I do think especially Zymetica was a huge leg up in learning the design process, learning how to use SolidWorks, effectively, that led me to that first position. But also Brown in general, I mean, my first position at Shark to go there was actually in more sustaining engineering, which to those on the call, it's things go into the market and are not perfect. Nothing's perfect in consumer product design. We launch stuff before they're ready. We launch stuff before we figured out all the kinks. And our job right away was to solve all of the problems, for products that were in the market at the time. And it's definitely not the most glamorous blue sky advanced development fun part of engineering, but it was an extremely good learning experience of how do you kind of condense a problem, prioritize all of the issues, and then get get those fixes in place. Which I think Brown and we had kind of talked about like how different classes help with that, and taking the framework of how to kind of boil down a problem and prioritize your work is one of the big takeaways I got from Brown.
Right.
Um,
So,
you
so,
know,
so you were there at Shark Ninja for almost 3 years. How'd you decide it was time to move on?
yeah, that this is another good kind of point of self-reflection of looking at my day-to-day and everything that I like to do. And it kind of going back to that, I loved design and wasn't getting enough of that blue sky open design. Um, I'd actually got an opportunity. Someone, the CEO reached out from a very small startup that was doing a sweat sensor in Boston. And this was an opportunity for me to be the sole mechanical engineer for a super early product. So instead of taking the sure thing that SharkNinja was and not liking, 50% of my day to day, I ended up taking another leap and moved over to that startup, which I think this was one of the question prompts of talking about a time you failed. Going to that startup for 9 months, doing everything we can to get a prototype out the door in the amount of time which we did, and then kind of watching that fizzle out because there wasn't a whole lot of money there was uh, successful for me in a way of I learned a lot because I got super good hands-on experience, but also a failure in a way because I didn't assess the startup enough before I joined. So that's also something I've carried with me from there of
So Shark
doing a
Ninja,
little.
big enough to sustain itself with revenue, and maybe you have a good
Yeah.
year, you have a less good year. Um, but the difference with the startup is, yeah, the engineering might have been cool, and you probably had, I would imagine, a much broader remit, right? Because you were the guy as opposed to you were one
Yep.
of many engineers. But the important learning is that, someone's got to pay for all that innovation, and that's an important part of the equation too.
Exactly. Exactly. But those chances are also fun to take. I, it's also a good point of learning of not just what the company does and who you're working with and your boss are all like three huge important things. But the size of the company matters as well. Um, you know, Shark Ninja was 3,000-ish people to 7, and then to when I went to Bose, 10,000, and then back to a startup, and then now back to Apple. So like getting a feel for what makes you happy, either big or small, is also an important like self-reflection and evaluation point there.
Right. And would you think that different people sort of naturally fit in different places? How did you figure out that, you know, you like big, you like small, you like something in the middle?
Totally. I'm definitely happy at Apple right now, but I definitely tend to like smaller places, I think. There's two. I would say the big difference is small is open-ended and scary. A lot of times there's not someone telling you what to do. It is up to you to solve the problems and gain the experience to get there. There's not always a bunch of mentorship. A big company is safe and then there can also be some bureaucracy where you have to do a little bit more process, or you have to document a little bit better. And that to some people is good and comforting, and people like the steadiness of that. So it kind of getting in and understanding what makes you happy and what makes you feel fulfilled on a daily basis is huge.
Right. So
And not super, and try not to be like super stressed out. Like if you're at a startup and you're super stressed out by the ambiguity of everything, maybe it's not
that's right.
it's not right yet or not right for you at that point.
Right. So where is your internal compass? You know, it's hard to
Yeah.
argue that training is a great thing, and a company that's more established might give you that. So if that's
Yep.
what you're after, and like you said, maybe the slow and steady, and I'm willing to take the trade-offs, that could be great. But it also could be great if you're like, you know, screw that. I kind of want the fast pace. I got this. I can figure it out. Right. Cool. All right. So where to from the startup? And how big was that, by the way? How many people?
The startup was 5 to 7.
All right. So all right.
It was a CEO. It was a CEO of 3 engineers and someone in marketing. So very, very small.
Right. So you
Which
got to
was
really do everything.
yeah,
All right. So
eye-opening.
you've learned a lot. You've learned product design.
Yep.
You've learned the cycle. You've learned big. You've learned small. What was the next step?
So yeah, the next step was Bose, which was I wanted more. So it was like almost overcorrecting to because I had like done SolidWorks by myself, learned it, and I wanted something that was like a little more process oriented. I wanted to learn how to do product design in a very organized and formulaic way. SharkNinja was also pretty chaotic in the way they did product design. And Bose is super established, very like great quality products. And the other thing for me was having an office in Boston. So they just opened an office in Boston Landing, which is no longer there. But yeah, that was the big step for me of let's go do consumer products, stay in the health space. So the other great thing for Bose and that I learned that I liked at Nix, which was doing a sweat sensor, was I like designing products that interact with the human body. So basically since the startup, was my focus in doing that. Bose is great. It was a year and a half. We went start to finish on the Sleepbuds, which I think they recently sold the rights to those, but that was like an awesome opportunity to see how a like well-oiled machine gets a product out the door.
Right. So more well-oiled than a SharkNinja, which even at 3,000 people is not as established as Bose, which is, we all know Bose, right?
Yeah.
Top of the line kind of company. Tell me one other thing as you're kind of going through this journey, you're learning about yourself. You know, there's probably a reason you chose biomedical engineer, and that maybe manifested itself after the SharkNinja experience. tell me more about your journey on what you've now learned at the end of your time at Bose. So we're up to kind of 2020 or so, right? What have you figured out that matters to you?
At that point, yeah, I wanted, so Bose was great, and I think what was important to me at the end of that, which unfortunately ended with a layoff, so to everyone on here, like, layoffs do happen now, especially during these like crazy up and down tech cycles. But I think like I was always confident I was going to land on my feet, so it's like keep kind of looking for the next thing there. But what I looked for the next thing kind of post Bose was I wanted another wearable. I wanted something a little bit smaller than Bose, and I wanted an opportunity to grow and manage a team, which ended up being what was going on at Whoop. And that kind of this is almost another question we had kind of talked about the other day, of a point of self-reflection and what I maybe didn't hear as like a college student, of what's the normal track for an engineer. Like, where does an engineer go, like, as they work their way through industry and through life. And there's I a lot of different ways to take it, but you can do an individual contributor route and be that like key principal engineer, like, as you grow through, and be a super skilled engineer just working on one or a few things in a program. You can work your way up through engineering management, which that's the track that I ended up choosing, which I loved because I learned that I loved mentoring. I learned that I loved helping lead a team get a product out the door. And then there's also, you don't have to stay in engineering. I've a lot of people that I've gone to school with have since moved into like product marketing or product management, where you specify how the product should be for the user. Or you go into program management, which is organizing the schedule for how engineers should do it. So outside of like just the design side, I think it's a lot of learnings of the different paths an engineer can take through industry, I think was important at the end.
And maybe let's just jump back for a second. I do want to get to the last point on Apple. So you mentioned a couple of different careers, all of which are very relevant for engineers from Brown. You talked about product design, obviously. You talked about product marketing. You talked about product management and program management. How much of that did you know while you were at Brown?
Almost none, which is
Right.
why I wanted to get it here, of like or put it out there, of like what the different paths are.
Right. Because I can
I
go
always
back in.
thought you go for engineering, you go design products. Like, that was like
Right. And is there anything you would do differently knowing what you know now?
the great thing for me is no. Like, I really enjoy what I do, and the path that I've taken so far. And I think I've also been lucky with some good mentors in the different roles I've had, and good people to like, ha- you know, do you want to explore this? And most of the time I said, no, I want to keep doing design, and I want to move up, this path. So I don't think I would have, but
So maybe the good news
there,
for you is even when you're at Brown, you kind of knew that design was a thing that kind of got you going, right? And then it was sort of picking
hmm
up flavors of design, big company, small company, health
yeah.
oriented, not, right? Like you sort of refined your understanding of what it is you like. Um, so for any sort of words of wisdom for those that maybe don't have that clarity at this moment.
And yeah, we had talked about this. It's like, take the first job isn't the end. It can be if you love it a bunch, but the first job is kind of a stepping stone to figuring out what you like and getting in a company that um, can help you grow and build that resume to what you like. Um, the Yeah, it's like I think we had talked about this of when you're somewhere and you're not happy, like have those hard conversations with your boss. Like, hey, this isn't where I want to be on my day to day. This isn't what I like. What other opportunities are there within a company that I can start to explore? And even if it doesn't end up being 100% of your time or 50% of your time, even shadowing other groups at those places is hugely helpful to understand like their day to day. Do you actually like this? And it's tough to assess unless you kind of jump in
Right,
to
as opposed to
each of
like
the
saying,
roles.
I don't like product design, I want to do marketing, going to marketing in a different company altogether, and then deciding,
Yes.
"Oh,
Yeah.
I actually did like design a little more than this, right?
Yep.
So, all right, so cool. Tell us a little bit about, the last transition from Whoop, which sounds like a pretty cool experience, and I know a lot of people love
Yeah.
that product. And
hmm
how'd you decide that you're done there and you want to move to Apple?
Yeah. The we had just launched the last product and we're wrapping up basically the final touches for the next gen that isn't even out yet. And that was, a year and a half ago and it's not out yet. And this was more of a personal decision on my part is I had been in New England my entire life and I've been trying to live in a different area. And this opportunity popped up with a few people that I had worked with at Bose that were at Apple and in this Boulder office. Um, and I went for it again to get back into audio and to get to another place with some more resources for learning, mentorship, and growth. And yeah, I would say 50% was a personal decision of trying to get, um, not away from Boston, but a new experience outside of Boston because I do think place is, you know, another important part of your career and experiencing different areas of the country. Um, I mean, some people do love staying in one spot and absolutely like are happy with that. In my personal experience, wanted something, a change of scenery. And I knew I had networked or had made good connections at Bose, and even though that stint was, a year and a half, it's been great so far getting back with that team here on audio.
But there's
So,
there's a lot of people stuff going on there in your story, right? So, at Brown, you connected with a certain, professor, and that helped kind of, early in your job, you said, a couple points of transition. You spoke with your manager and you're like, look, that's not exactly right. What else can I do?
mhm,
Now here you are, even though it's not a group at Whoop, but it's a group from your previous company, right? And that you kept in
yep,
touch with from Bose that actually helped that transition. So maybe just
mhm.
wax for a second philosophical on how much of the overall equation ends up being people versus kind of the engineer's mindset of like I'm going to do my thing.
Yeah, at least 50%, if not more. Um, the the connections you make at each place are very important, and even if you're not friends with everyone you work with, which you definitely don't have to be, um, it's important to keep connections and kind of keep up with those you've worked with in the past. I've had great luck. The consumer engineering world, at least on the East Coast, is rather small. So keeping up with what everyone's doing, if you're not happy in a certain place, is always good to reach out and say, "Hey, are there opportunities here? Hey, how are things going? Like, hey, what's the inside scoop on this place?" Um, so even if you don't end up jumping, it's interesting to stay in touch and see what all of these other places are doing. So that it's been super helpful to now have this big network of engineers and outside of engineering roles like in this world to reach out to and see like get the pulse on what each company is doing and how it
Right.
feels.
So, I mean, 50% is a big number, right? And was there
Yeah.
any inkling while you were at Brown that it would be that much, or was your mindset
I
more
don't
like
think so. I always thought it was, you know, if you're great in your role, you'll get the position you want and
things will just work out, right?
things will just work out.
Right.
But it really is those connections you make and it it's almost I think networking is like everyone kind of rolls their eyes in college, like, oh, I have to go talk to all these people. But as you move through your career, networking becomes less of a chore and more of like keeping up with
Right. Could be just
like you
having
keep
lunch
up
with
with your
someone.
classmates. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Lunch, a drink, a text message.
Yeah.
Um, all of those things are hugely important just to like, you know, stay relevant with those that you've worked with.
Very
It's
cool.
actually
So I know
a
we're
good
right around
story
now.
from a good story from China recently, just like antidote and fun, and then we can jump into everyone's questions of I had worked with someone at Shark. She's at a different company. I'm at a different company, and we actually ended up at the same hotel in China at the same time.
All right.
And it was great to catch up there. So
That's awesome.
the world is small, no matter how far you travel.
That's awesome. And just before we get to questions, I know there must be a lot of interest in Apple just because it's a brand that almost everyone follows. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Apple, and then maybe we go to Q&A right after that.
Yeah, my day to day is I'm back in. I do have an intern, so I do get some and also mentor another junior engineer. So I do have that management mentorship that I loved, and yeah, my day to day is designing all of the parts that go into an AirPod. So it's a lot of time in we use NX instead of SolidWorks, but it's another CAD software. Um, it's a lot of that, a lot of tolerance analysis, a lot of making presentations to explain your design, explain why things are going wrong, explain why things are going right. Um, and then at this point of the program, like we are building and testing and making design changes to make it a better product. So yeah, the day to day varies. Another thing probably I didn't know about product design and the product cycle is your day to day changes depending on where you are in the program. Um, so I think sometimes everyone thinks like, oh, you're always designing. It's just not the case. A lot of times you're doing, uh, you know, failure analysis to understand why certain reliability tests are going wrong, and sometimes you're building up prototypes and spending your day doing that, and maybe 25% of the time is actually spent in the CAD software, and then a lot of time is close collaboration with like I work very closely with the electrical engineers, so a lot of time is sitting with other teams and understanding their problems because at Apple the product design team is system engineers. So it's our responsibility to then integrate all of the needs of acoustics, RF, which is like the Bluetooth team, and electrical engineering and tech ops, which is manufacturing. Like, how does it go together? So we have to take everyone's wants and needs and prioritize them to, what gets a product out the door. So yeah, the day to day definitely varies depending on where we are in the product cycle.
Yeah, look, what a great story overall. And I feel like we barely scratched the surface. And we talked about kind of, figuring out what you want, refining. We talked about the impact of people along the way. We talked about reflection and kind of understanding, well, what do I like about what I do? How do I want to change that? Talked about big companies versus small, kind of what you do
Hmm.
day to day. I mean, it's a lot of ground. And I thank you for that. I know there's got to be a ton of questions. So maybe I'll pause here. I'll say thanks, Dan, and maybe Sarah, if you could help navigate the
Yeah,
both the end of the
absolutely.
recording and then the start of the questions.
Yeah, so I'm going to pause the recording now. Okay, I've resumed the recording. Paul Ash, do you want to finish with our final question that we always ask, or would you like me to?
No, let me just say thanks to everyone for
Yeah.
joining. I'll just add one word to, I think, Deshaun's question on startup. So, I think everything Dan said is true, right? And you can all be under the umbrella of kind of the technical evaluation of, do you like what you're doing? Do you think the product's going to work, et cetera? There's one other important piece, which is just, frankly, you can assess it all in one question, which is when's the cash out date, right? And it's an important question to ask these startups, right? The startups are all about can you do the science in time while you still have money? So make sure you ask that one question. But for me, before passing it back to Sarah, thank you, Dan, for taking the time. Terrific conversation, really very relevant. And hopefully you found it a good use of your time. I'm sure I speak on behalf of a lot of students when I say it was terrific.
Thank you. No, I had a great time.
Yes, and on the Career Center side, we want to thank you, Dan, and then also thank Paul Ash and this engineering working group who has really brought forward a lot of great programming for engineering students, including this one, and hopefully is the beginning of more to come. Dan, before we close, I'm going to ask you the question we always ask at the end, and it's a quick answer. What is one thing you know now that you wish you knew while you were at Brown?
Yeah, I guess I kind of spoke to it. I wish I had, even though I wouldn't change it, I wish I had known that there were so many different career paths and opportunities to take from a BME or MECI standpoint that still put you in an industry that you like, but might not be like hard, hands-on design. So if you love the industry and you love the product, there's so many opportunities to be involved, whether it be, like we had listed off the different roles, but yeah, there's a lot of space in there if you're smart and, passionate about what you do.
Great. Thank you. And thank everyone for coming. And I hope everyone gets a chance to enjoy the beautiful weather that we're finally having here in Providence, Rhode Island. So everyone have a great day and thanks for joining us.